DMDongo here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at The Frozen Forge by Dustin Martins, on sale for $2.99. Right, The Frozen Forge, what are you getting here? Well, this is a D&D 5th edition adventure module for 4 4th level characters. It should be run about between 6 to 8 hours, but it's scalable between 3rd or 5th level. Your adventuring party is tasked with investigating the disappearance of an employee of Nana's trading company and potentially ending the unseasonable weather that is occurring throughout the area. On your adventures, your party will combat the bitter cold, along with a host of heat-stealing enemies, ultimately culminating with a climactic battle with an elemental gone wild. Or weird. Both are kind of true here. The adventure itself has strong links to the Prince of the Apocalypse adventure, so it could easily run as part of that campaign if you are looking to break things up a bit. So if you're in the Prince of the Apocalypse campaign, but your party is, or your adventure is kind of getting aboard with the usual like hack and slash or this type of adventure that's in there, you can break this up. You can break that up with this adventure. It's really kind of a nice little addition. The adventure is split up into 3 main chapters. Chapter 1 of the adventure deals with the town of Loudwater and gives the adventurers some background about the area, the forge, and the general state of play, and gives them an introduction to the NPCs they'll be helping and saving. Chapter 2 is all about the journey, traveling the road that the faithful employee was last seen on and discovering that the cold may not be all that it seems. And finally, Chapter 3 is at the forge itself, uncovering the cause of the weather and possibly putting a stop to it. Included are some truly beautiful maps, 3 new magical items, and a unique creature for use in the adventure. Right, now what did I like about this? Well, I like the inclusion of the false rumors in Chapter 1, and secrets they might discover or red herrings that might lead a player down the wrong path. It makes the world feel more real, more lived in. It's not every day that, the villagers are going to know every single secret and know them all perfectly truthfully. Rumors aren't like that. Rumors are like, the telephone game, where a piece of information is passed down multiple times through multiple people. It never ends up quite the same as it should when it started. And in addition to that, I really like the inclusion of the weather and the condition mechanics from the Dungeon Master's Guide. It adds something to the adventure that I think could really challenge players who aren't used to dealing with extreme cold or any of these kinds of things. It forces a different kind of mentality, gives a more exploration kind of feel to the whole adventure. I also like the inclusion of the scaling mechanics. This is such a nice little adventure, it would be a shame not to run it because your party is either too high level or too low. And it's not just as simple as adding monsters here or there, it's the inclusion of different creature types and different random encounters that you can run, depending on your party level or how much time they want to spend. You only have 3 hours, or you can only run 1 session a month. Maybe take out the random encounters and start them at the forge. And there's all this nice little stuff around that to make this more accessible to a broader range of people. The unique creature as well is really interesting idea, and I love the lore behind it. Draining heat from your enemies has a lot of interesting applications and ways your players can manipulate this unique feature to their advantage. It makes the combats more interesting because there's a way of like adjusting and fixing and making the enemies do what a player wants, depending on if they're clever enough to figure it out. Finally, the maps are absolutely gorgeous, and I love everything about them, and they are so well done here. Now, what didn't I like about this adventure? So there's only a couple of things here because this is a really well-written adventure. In Chapter 1, there is a slight implication that Madame Aurore knows that the weather might be related to the forge. It might have been nice to know as a DM why that is. Or it could just be me more reading into something that isn't there. It's possible. The changes to the existing creatures, I think, may have adjusted their challenge rating as a result of the damage die moving up. But this isn't mentioned. Now, this isn't a problem if you're running things like milestone XP, but it does matter if you're running like traditional experience point calculations. So it might have been nice to know if on the page whether or not that change had occurred. I think they've gone up a little bit, but I'm not 100% sure. I haven't done the math out. Finally, it might have been nice to include some PDF navigation, but this isn't a deal breaker as the module is quite small. Right, now onto my final thoughts and rating. And as this is an adventure module, I'll be using my perk system. So polish, exploration, roleplay, and combat. So the 3 pillars of D&D plus a polish feature. So combat in this is really interesting. There's a lot of different encounters, a lot of interesting ways of fighting. There's a lot of environmental hazards. There's a lot of environmental effects. Things like ice and snow and the weather itself make combat really interesting and dynamic. It means that every fight is potentially something you could avoid and potentially something you might want to. There are ways around combat that are sort of combat related. It's really, really interesting in the way it's structured. Well done here, so 5 out of 5. Next, we move on to roleplay. Roleplay here is actually kind of weirdly strong and weirdly weak. It depends on what your players do and whether or not they decide to engage with certain NPCs they may not ordinarily engage with. Your players will be tasked with talking to creatures that they wouldn't ordinarily give the time of day, or think that they're aggressive by their nature. It's gonna be hard to figure out, as a DM, to figure out how to breach that and broach that subject very quickly and dynamically. There is a random encounter that involves some winter wolves that may help with that, and I would really recommend anyone running this adventure to run that random encounter as part of this, so that you can get some better roleplay experiences further on. So, saying that, the roleplay that you do get means that you can change the flow of the way the adventure runs and how and why and who ends up helping who. So roleplay here, I think I'm only going to give a 4 out of 5 because of the weird kind of, you have to, your players' odd expectations about certain creatures make this a little tricky. Next, we move on to exploration. Exploration is really interesting in this one. In terms of the things you could potentially do, there are lots of ways you can manipulate the enemies and manipulate the various creatures and things, and because of the weather mechanics, it makes that really interesting. There are lots of places to explore, even though the maps are very small. There are lots of little interesting things you could potentially do. And as this could be run as part of Princess of the Apocalypse, it means that your party could go farther beyond the adventure's boundaries rather easily. So there is some exploration here, and there are some interesting things you can do in terms of choice and the way that things are structured. It's a little hard to explore a very single track kind of adventure. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 as well. There are some interesting things here. I think more choice or maybe more interesting kind of mechanics around like getting lost potentially could have helped in this area. Also, I think some interesting things that could have happened in the village to unlock additional like maybe side quests or things you could explore as a result of, because you have this nice world map. Why not say, well, you've got the main Frozen Forge, but then maybe there's something else along the path that one other villager is looking for. It might have been nice because that way you can have a broader exploration tag. So, but it's still some really interesting stuff you can do. So I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. Finally, polish. And this section I really can't fault. The maps are gorgeous. They're in separate files. There's some really beautiful art that is really evocative, and it really hits the tone just right. There's some really, really good things. The only thing I would say is that building tokens, it would have been nice to include maybe the blue fire elemental as like more in some way, so that I could get a token around it a little easier, I guess. It's a really hard thing to explain, but essentially, but saying that, that's a minor quibble. The formatting is great. There's a really good way of everything's been laid out, so I have to give it 5 out of 5 here as well. Really, really well done job. So my total, so we have 5 for combat, 4 for roleplay, and 4 for exploration, and a 5 for polish. So that gives me a total of 18. Divide by 4, you get 4.5, and so I'm going to give it 4.5 stars out of 5 on the DM's Guild, which is a really, really good score. I really like this adventure. I'm going to be running it very soon. I really like the structure, everything's laid out. I may include some additional stuff around other NPCs that exist in the village that they can branch off to, so that it's more that the players get more choice out of it. But that's like a thing that I'll be adding in addition to it. And I might want to see some additional things like in the future. if the Frozen Forge is ever updated. So thank you. This has been DM Dongo. Please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and use my affiliate codes if you decide to purchase the Frozen Forge. Peace out.